Hey, my name is Steve, composer, engineer, and lecturer. Welcome back to the channel and your first steps into Logic Pro. In this course, we aim to introduce you to Logic Pro and get you familiar with the basic features you need to start making some music today. We've already covered off the basic introduction and setup, the materials that you need, and a little bit of an introduction to the interface. Don't forget, you can always head back to those videos and check them out. But now we're going to start diving into the track types, specifically recording audio. Let's dive in. All right, before we dive into the DAW and actually start looking at audio tracks, let's talk a little bit about the why. Recording audio into your DAW is probably the most fundamental reason for a DAW, and is in fact how most studios were recording for a long time before DAWs were even a thing. You think back to multi-track tape recorders, essentially we're recording audio through these large consoles onto tape. In the last century, that's really been the focus of audio studios, recording multi-track audio. Now with the DAW, of course, there are many other options, but let's focus on audio for a moment. So recording audio allows you to capture any kind of acoustic instrument, whether it be your voice, or an acoustic guitar, or a flute, or a violin, or a drum kit. Anything that is existing in the real world and making a sound, you could record and put it into your DAW. Many producers, many songwriters, many composers still rely on audio recordings because it adds a sort of realism and flavor that you sometimes can't get with software instruments. In order to record audio into the DAW, you do need an audio interface and possibly a microphone with an XLR cable. Of course, you might have a guitar or another type of instrument that has an instrument out and an audio interface that has an instrument in, you're set to go. But if you're planning on recording any kind of voice or any kind of acoustic instrument that doesn't have its own instrument out, you're definitely going to need a microphone. The other thing you will definitely need is closed back headphones, because when recording with a microphone, you don't want to hear your speakers playing what you're recording back again. One, that's going to end up in a bit of a feedback loop, and two, it's going to be a whole bunch of sound that we just don't want to capture. It's going to muddy your mix. It just won't be great for what you want to do. So what is the aim when we're recording audio? We're aiming to get something as clear as possible, easy to be heard audio recording. We don't want anything that is too quiet or too loud. In order to achieve that, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. One is recording in a decent environment. This may be something easier said than done, because at home, it's not often the best audio environment to be recording in. You might have cars traveling around, which is sort of something that's happening to me at the moment, so I'm having to pause every now and again. You might have people in the house moving around and what they're doing is getting caught in the microphone as well. Even just random things that are on, such as fridges or air conditioners, produce a noise that can be picked up by the microphone. This is what we sort of call background noise or noise. And the actual audio that we want to record that might be coming from the guitar or your voice is the signal that we're trying to record. And that signal to noise ratio needs to be as far apart as possible. So if we get into a quieter room with less noise around us, the signal will be louder in comparison to that noise and we'll get a clearer recording. The other thing is you want to set the gain on your audio interface correctly. You want to be able to turn up the gain enough to be able to hear the sound and to get far enough away from the noise, but not so much that it clips and distorts or causes any issues. So there is a good level, which we'll take a look at in a moment. So let's set up an audio track for a guitar to begin with. I've got a guitar here with me in the studio and I'll be able to play that guitar through my audio interface with just simply an instrument or a guitar lead. There are a couple of things to be aware of, so we'll walk through that now. First things first, you want to be able to connect your guitar output all the way to your audio interface with that guitar cable. What you also want to make sure is that audio interface is expecting an instrument level. When we plug in the guitar lead to the audio interface, it could treat it as either an instrument or a line level. Guitars are always instrument level, and some keyboards are instrument and some are line, so it's important to check and change your audio interface accordingly. That instrument and that line level, they're not at the same volume. The line is louder than the instrument, so by setting it, we make sure that the audio interface doesn't have to turn up too much or down too far in order to make that a good sound. All right, so I've got my guitar here. Now I need to add an audio track into my Logic session. If I come up to the plus button at the top here, I can select audio track. And at this point, I can change the input to the input I've connected to on my audio interface. This guitar is actually going into input number 1, so it's perfect at the moment as is. My audio output is always just at my stereo track, my 1 and 2. All right, I can give that one a name. And we can see our inspector is open and here is our guitar channel strip. Now, if I play something on the guitar, nothing's going to happen. We can see nothing coming up there in the guitar channel. It's not even jumping at any levels. And that's because we haven't got input monitoring on. Right now, that track is basically waiting for audio to be on the track before it starts playing anything back. But we want it to play what we're playing right now so we can hear it. If I turn the input monitoring on and strum the guitar a couple of times, and now we can hear our guitar coming through quite nicely. Now what I've done is I've turned up the gain or the volume on my audio interface in order to get this to a pretty good level. The level, if I play the guitar, you'll see it's dancing around somewhere between -18 and -12, which is a good place to be. There are some peaks going above that, and that's why we have that headspace. It's there so that if I play an extra loud note sometime, it's not going to distort, it's not going to cause an issue. Now, it's very important that when you're setting this gain, you don't play a really loud guitar part and then set the gain to that, and then when you go to record, it's a simple, easy strum, a Stairway to Heaven type style thing. You want to be able to set the gain based on what you're about to play. So if I was to hit this guitar really loud right now, it would actually be too much gain, but that's not the part that I'm playing. But if I play the part that I'm playing, you'll see that the levels are quite good. Right now it sounds a bit dry though because we haven't got any audio effects, so I might want to come in here and add something to it. You can of course come into your library, jump into maybe some electric guitar type sounds and see what you can find. Quite like the sound of that one, that's quite nice. Do bear in mind though, if you're about to record with those plugins set already, that's going to require a bit more of a powerful CPU. And with that question of buffer comes back in. Do we need to set that buffer higher? Does that compensate our latency? So it is a bit of a balancing act. At the moment, it's okay, my computer can easily handle it. However, as you get more and more tracks added in, as you record more, as you do more software instruments in particular, that will become a little bit more intense on your CPU. So bear that in mind as you're playing. All right, if I soloed this for a moment and aim to record a small part, you'll see it in action. At this point, I could turn on my metronome if I wanted to. If I turn my metronome on and hit play, you'll hear the metronome, of course. And that is dictated by the speed. That's my tempo at the top here. If I was to drag this up and down or double click and add in a particular value of say 120 or 60, then it will change our BPM or beats per minute. Of course, I've got my session already happening. I don't want to change my tempo right now because that's going to throw everything out. You want to do that before you start anything. So decide on your tempo first before start recording. So I've turned on my metronome. If you right click, you can jump into metronome settings, and that gives you the option to change the volume of the metronome and the tone of the metronome. So if you don't like the way that the click is sounding or you want more of it, you can change that here. I'm quite happy with it, so I'm going to leave it as is. The other button that's next to it is a count-in. I both love and hate this little count-in thing. Essentially what this one does is it gives me 1 bar of whatever time signature I'm in at the moment, and it counts me in before it starts recording. So it would give me 4 beats in this case, and then start the recording. A little bit of advice here at this juncture though, is while that's excellent, do still make sure that you are starting the recording before you start playing. What I mean is you don't want it to count 4 in and then right on beat 1, you're playing your first note, because you might be a little bit nervous and you might play that note a little bit early and that beginning part of the note doesn't get captured because the count-in wasn't recording anything. So if you are planning on using the count-in, still start a little bit ahead of that recording to make sure you give yourself enough time to get started. So I'm going to start on bar 5 here, and I'm just going to record something in isolation, not to anything else, but I've got the click track on and we'll see what happens. So I have my audio track in there nice and easy, and if I hit play back now, I'm going to turn the metronome off because I don't want to hear that right now, but we'll hear what I've played. So a very straightforward, easy process to set up. Nothing too dramatic there. Bear in mind, once you're done with the track, it's great to turn off input monitoring. That way, if you ever come back to the track, it's not going to suddenly scream with feedback because you've left a microphone on or something happening. So it's a good process to be in. It's just to turn off input monitoring and certainly turn it off before you start unplugging anything. Now that was recording a guitar. Quite easy, instrument output, nice and straightforward. A lot of keyboards are also the same. Microphones, on the other hand, do require a little bit of extra thought. However, they do follow a very similar process. So I'm going to connect up this SM57, one of the microphones I recommend you just have in your toolkit because it's incredibly useful on a lot of different things. We'll get it connected and see how it works. Okay, so I've got the microphone connected here. So the process that you want to follow for connecting your microphone is obviously connecting the XLR from the back of the microphone to your audio interface. By default, it's going to treat it at mic level because XLR connections are usually coming in at microphone level. Now at this point, if you're wanting to record the microphone and hear yourself while it's playing back, you are going to need a set of closed back headphones. Those closed back headphones will prevent any bleed from coming through to the microphone, but also it will prevent feedback from your studio monitors. So if you do have studio monitors, make sure you turn them down or mute them before you connect your microphone and get headphones at the ready. So I have done all of that. I've connected up my microphone. I've muted my speakers in the studio. I'm actually not going to record anything now, but otherwise if I wanted to, I would be putting on my headphones and getting some levels correct. What we'll do is I've connected this one to input 2, so I'll create a new audio track. So I'll add new audio track, audio, and I'm going to change the input to input 2. Depending on your audio interface and how many inputs and outputs it has, this list will change. Mine's got quite a few, but I'm only using really 1 and 2 in this project. All right, I'm going to solo it up and give it a name. Now on my audio interface, I actually have a little bit of a gain gauge, so it can let me know how much it's being turned up or down by and what sort of level it's hitting. But otherwise, we would need to turn on the input monitoring and up the gain until we get to a point where it's okay, and it's in that -18 to -12 sweet spot. If you are using a condenser microphone though, it will require something called phantom power. Now most audio interfaces have this, and it's a button that you turn off and on. Either that button will be labeled as phantom power or it'll have +48V for 48 volts. Essentially, condenser microphones need this charge in order to work and actually pick up any sound. Now it is very important that you turn the gain all the way to the bottom before you engage phantom power. And the same, before you unplug the microphone at the end, you turn it all the way down and turn off phantom power. You want to avoid damaging the microphone or the audio interface by unplugging it or plugging it in with phantom power turned up and the gain turned up. This microphone in particular is a dynamic microphone. It doesn't need phantom power, so I won't need to turn it on in this case. But if I had the Rode NT1A, which I also recommended in an earlier video, that would need phantom power, and I would be turning that one on before I turn up the gain. All right, so I'm going to turn on my input monitoring. I'm just going to keep talking into the microphone as I turn up the gain. So here we can see as I turn up the gain, we're starting to get a signal coming through. I'm looking at the inspector and I'm making sure that I can see that it's starting to jump between -18 and -12. There we go. It looks like it's in a pretty good spot. Obviously, if I say a little bit louder, like that first word there, obviously, that's going to come through a little bit above -12. That's okay. That's what the headroom is there for, to make sure that we don't have any issues and that those peaks that come through don't hit. Now what happened there is as I was talking, I had a plosive, a p or a k sort of sound. Those plosive sounds can be more harsh than any other sound that you can make with your voice, and that causes a louder transient. There are some things like pop filters which you can put in front of the microphone to stop that from happening, so I recommend using that if you are going to use a vocal mic. The Rode NT1A, for instance, comes in a kit with a shock mount and a pop filter to avoid any kind of hand fumbling or any kind of room noise from the floor coming up, and to reduce plosives as well. Obviously, if I wanted to record something, I would then hit record and away I go. I could sing to my heart's content and I would have a recording just the same way as I had with the guitar. Of course, again, the same thing. I would turn my input monitoring off and I would turn the gain on the microphone all the way down before I unplug any cables. And of course, if it's a condenser microphone, you're turning that gain all the way off, phantom power off before you unplug that microphone. One thing to mention about microphones is that their position does change the sound quite a bit. So this is a little bit extra on top of the logic training, but here's a little bit of advice with microphones. Dynamic ones do need to be closer. So you need to get them pretty much straight on the source in order for it to be heard clearly. If you think about a guitar cabinet, for instance, you need it as close as possible so that it captures as much detail as possible. Condenser microphones, on the other hand, can be backed off quite a bit because they're a lot more sensitive, so they don't need to be as close. In fact, often because of the proximity effect, it doesn't sound very good when you're too close to a condenser cardioid microphone anyway. Back it off a little bit. I usually say an outstretched hand is a good distance between you and the condenser when you're singing, or about that distance again wherever you place your microphone on whatever instrument you're trying to capture with a condenser. The other thing as well is whether it's on axis or off axis. So if I'm on axis, I've got the microphone pointing straight at my face. Obviously, that's where I'm making the noise. So the microphone is absolutely on point. If the microphone was off axis, as in it was pointing somewhere other than the source, that is actually going to reduce the amount of detail that's coming through. Most of the time what it does is it rolls off the top end first, so you get a darker, warmer sound. And that could actually be something creative that you want to experiment with. However, again, if you're going for the clearest, cleanest tone, you'll probably want it to be on axis and within a good distance from your source, depending on your microphone. Now, one really cool thing about audio tracks is that if you want to record a number of performances to get something right or to try different variations, you can do that quite easily with something called take folders. We can actually see I've left one in here for you. The ambient guitar has this sort of different look to the other guitar over here. And that's because we can open this up and see a number of takes. And what I've done is I've created a hybrid or a blend or a comp between the two. I'm kind of creating the best bits of each section and adding them together. Let's have a listen. So I may have tried something a little bit different on that second one, and I decided I ended up liking that one a little bit more. So I've kept what was good and just added a little bit extra and blended the two together, which is really, really nice. And then those two parts play together. If I wanted to, I could extend or change that to include less or more. So it's really up to me what I want to create from this comp folder. Now that we've made a quick recording of that guitar, let's look at some of the editing features that might help you out. So I'm just going to solo this one up. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that we can see what's going on down here. And essentially, I've just got one single region with a little bit of audio in there. Now, if I play from the beginning, it doesn't start straight away. There's a lot of silence there to begin with. So I can actually remove that. Now, you've seen me before use the bottom left and bottom right to bring the sides in, and you can definitely do that. Let's do that, for example. Bring this one in and slap bang, there it is. However, you can cut sections if you want to as well. If you put the playhead where you would like to make the cut and make sure you've got your region selected, use the keyboard shortcut Command T and it will chop the region into two. If I move the playhead out the way there, you can see two separate regions. So I could select that one, hit the delete key, and away it goes. I'll use my tools from before, my T and then the A to get to my fade tool, and just bring in a couple of little fades there. Press T to get back, and let's have a listen to that. Now you may have heard some sound beyond that audio region, and that's because the audio region is the dry guitar, and these effects that are on my inspector are actually producing or changing sound and creating a little bit of an overlay. So we heard a little bit of reverb die out over that time and a little bit more of the delay coming through. So that's why it ends after that. If I put the click track back on, let's have a listen to see how my timing was. So not so good at the end there. Deliberate, I swear, because I want to show you a particular feature. So if I tap the E on the keyboard or this pair of scissors here, I open up what's known as the editor. In here we can see in greater detail our waveform, and we can turn on something called flex time. If I turn this one on and I go turn on flex time, it will pick out every transient. Transients are the loud part of the beginning of every note, the attack of the note. If you think about a drum, it's the initial whack of the drum, and then the sustain is everything of the drum ringing out afterwards. In the case of a guitar, that initial pluck with the finger is the transient, and the sustain is that guitar note ringing out afterwards. So in this case, it's picked up that there are lots of different transients in here, and I can use my tools here to align those transients to the meter. So let's take a look. If I wanted to do this on every single one, I can see that I start to get a little bit fast and out of time there. So let's do some shaping up. For this start, for instance, I'm going to shape up a few of these down here. Now you'll notice that my tool changes as I go at the top and the bottom. That is quite an important distinction. You're going to probably always want to use this bottom one. The reason for that is the top one, if I click that one, creates a transient, but then if I drag that transient, the whole thing stretches left and right on either side, and that's throwing everything else out. So let's undo that and click down the bottom instead. This creates a transient marker there and one on the left and right, which means I can drag this one in peace and only affect the one that's here. So I'm going to move that one to there, and we're going to just keep going until we get this happening. Much more in time now, so everything is locked perfectly on the grid. Now there is some debate as to whether you want to lock it perfectly to the grid or not. That's up to you. Obviously, if you want to retain a little bit more of that human element, you don't want to put it bang on, but you can certainly correct major issues with this, even those moments where you want everything to be nice and tight together in line with everything else. Now, one thing to note is that right now there are gaps that are starting to happen as a result of the waveforms being moved. And that's because flex time has put it onto an algorithm known as slicing. This is great for drum hits because it just chops out the sound and moves it left and right without stretching the sound. But this guitar part was meant to be played all together. So if I turn that to monophonic, because I'm playing one note at a time, it's going to join those gaps back together and it might just sound a little bit more natural. In this case, not actually. Maybe because some of those moves are quite large, it hasn't really worked as well. Let's try another one, polyphonic for example. That's done a much nicer job there. So those algorithms can really change the way that it sounds, and that's very important when dealing with flexing the time and stretching and compressing it. We want it to still sound natural even after we've moved it. So after doing all that audio correction, recording the guitar, tightening it up with some flex time, and doing the fade-ins and fade-outs to cut out that extra bit of space, that track is now ready to go. Now you've got to grips with the basics of audio recording and editing. However, you can also make use of software instruments, and that's what we're going to check out in the next video. So click that subscribe button and follow along for the next video. I'll see you there.